Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm very honored and thrilled to have as my guest Adam Pascarella, who's the author of an upcoming book, Reversed in Part. Adam, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Richard, for having me. I've been going through your guest list, and you have some A-list guests on your program, so I'm very honored to be joining you today.
Well, thank you, Adam. So you've written an interesting book, or about to publish a book about lawyers who've done interesting careers. You yourself were a former lawyer. Tell me about your path to what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Reversed in Part is the name of the book, as you said. It's really a book that I wanted when I was as a practicing lawyer. I graduated from Penn Law in 2014 and started at a large commercial law firm out here in New York City. I was a general commercial litigator. I did breach of contract suits, did a little bit of antitrust work and white collar defense as well. But about a year or two into my job, I figured, I don't really know if I want to be here for the remainder of my career. And I think a lot of attorneys feel that way. There was nothing to do with my firm or the people I worked with. They were fantastic lawyers that I worked with. But looking inside and having some late nights thinking to myself what I wanted my career to look like, I thought that remaining in big law probably wasn't the best way to go. So ultimately, after some late nights, like I said, and talking to career coaches and my then girlfriend, now wife, I decided to leave legal practice and become an entrepreneur. I didn't really have a set path and what I wanted to do. I was lucky that I could leave at the time that I did because I'd gathered some savings to that point. So I did have some time to figure it out. But ultimately, I started a few businesses. I started a freelance writing business. I had a podcast similar to yours. And that led me to starting an investment management business, which I'm doing now. So to circle back, when I left the firm and I was thinking about my journey, I thought that others would be in a similar position. And I did some digging, and there aren't that many studies of lawyers that have done different things outside the legal field, but I did find one. It was from the American Bar Federation. It was a study that started in 2000. By 2003, I think it was around 8 or 9% of lawyers that passed the bar were not in legal practice anymore. By 2012, which is 12 years later, that was around 25%. So this is relatively common. If you're feeling like legal practice may not be for me for the remainder of my career, you certainly aren't alone. And I hope my book can provide some value to you.
Now, do you think that if you had known what you had known about law school, you would have not gone to law school, or you think it was an important step in getting to the point at which you are now?
I think it was an important step, to be honest. I was one of those ambitious college students that wanted to go to law school and didn't really have a set plan on what I wanted to do next. I thought that having a law degree would be a good backup plan because everyone says you can do anything with a law degree. That I kind of wrote the book to test that hypothesis. I do think that there are certain things that you can do with a law degree. I don't think you should go to law school in order to do non-legal things because it's a huge investment in terms of time and money, obviously. But I think, going back to where I was before law school, I didn't really have a good idea of what I wanted to do. If you would have told me then that I'd be running an investment management business, I would have been like, you're crazy. I have no interest in business or investing or stocks. So I do think that I had to go through that path. And if you feel like you've wasted time being an attorney, I fundamentally disagree with that proposition. Sometimes you do need to go on the wrong path for a certain amount of time in order to get on the right path.
Now, your book, you interview a number of former lawyers who obviously went on to do different things. Tell me a little bit about what the process was in terms of compiling this, list of guests that you put together.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are a lot of different paths that you can take by being a former lawyer. The sky is the limit. There aren't any major restrictions. Even if you wanted to become a doctor, for instance, you could go back to medical school in theory, and you could use some of the skills you learned in legal practice to supplement what you do as a doctor. But in any event, it started by me pursuing my own interests. Back in the day when I was in legal practice as a practicing lawyer, I was interested in the startup world. So I thought, maybe I can interview some startup founders that were former attorneys that perhaps started legal tech companies or even companies outside of the legal industry. That led me to my first interview, who was Keith Raboy, who is a member of the PayPal Mafia. He's currently based in Miami, a very well-known tech operator and investor. And then from there, I thought, it was really interesting speaking to Keith and hearing his story and his thoughts about the legal field and leaving the legal field. So I thought I'll take it a step further. I interviewed people like Sandra Daniels, who's the COO and co-founder of Thumbtack. I interviewed Anthony Scaramucci, and all of these people I cold emailed. I had no prior relationship, including you as well. Mm-hmm. It was mostly just following my interests in the beginning. And then from there, I figured if I'm going to write a book about this subject, it needs to have as diverse of a population as possible, both in terms of gender, experience, sectors. So after the startup realm in the beginning, I went to different sectors like policy and art and other things, and legal recruiting in your case. So I try to make it as diverse as possible. I think that achieving perfection in that realm is impossible, but I try to get as close as I could.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you have more guests than did you have to cut down the list, or was it hard, or what was your experience with that?
Yeah, I did have to cut down the list a bit. But for the most part, everyone was very nice and was willing to help me with the project. And I got some really good insights and practical steps on lawyers who want to do something different with their careers. And I would say, even if you aren't interested in a certain career line, for instance, I interviewed an artist. Her name is Nellie Bach. She's a crypto artist. I know nothing about art. I know little about cryptocurrency. But reading her interview, I think there are certain insights that you could gather that you can apply to your own career, no matter what you want to do.
Well, as you know, I have a podcast, and people always ask me when I'm interviewed what your favorite guest was. And so I hate that question. So I'm not going to ask you that, but I am going to ask you what maybe a couple of things did you learn from this process that you didn't have before, insights that you might have gotten from these interviews?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say I am going to answer that former question, actually.
Oh, okay, go ahead, please.
One of the most interesting interviews I had was with a man named Darren K. Roberts, who was a former NFL assistant coach. Now he's at the University of Texas, and he's also in the venture capital world, I believe. His story is amazing because he went to Harvard Law School thinking that he would become a senator or governor of Texas. While he was in Harvard and right before he graduated, he realized that he was interested in football, the NFL. Mm-hmm. He wanted to become a coach. He had literally zero experience both in coaching and the NFL. But that didn't stop him. He worked a summer camp, I think it was in the South somewhere, started connecting with coaches in the NFL and college football, engaged in a letter writing campaign, and ultimately became an assistant coach for the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's an unbelievable story. It's something that I think a lot of people kind of hypothesize about, like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if I became an NFL coach, whether in law school or not? He actually did it, and he hustled. He put in the time, and that's going back to your question. That's one of the key principles that I learned throughout this book is that really there are few limits on what you want to do. Now, granted, when leaving the legal field, there are the financial limitations potentially that you may have, and you do really need to think hard about that. But if you do want to get from point A to point B, and you have a legal background, you have the training, you have critical thinking skills, those sort of things, it's certainly not impossible as long as you put in the work. So hustling and drive and resilience, those are some of the main principles that I learned. But beyond that, I think the power of relationships is the biggest lesson that I learned from this book. The most interesting opportunities that come from leaving the law, you aren't going to find by submitting your resume on Indeed.com, something like that. It's just not going to happen. And if you go through every single interview in this book, you'll find that some sort of relationship led the interviewee to where they are now in a much happier and more prosperous place. And I think that's even the case with you, moving from legal practice to ML&A. You had a partner or a friend kind of entice you. He helped you think through the pros and cons of doing it, and you went from there.
And I certainly wouldn't have met him if I had not been a lawyer. So that's true.
Right.
Was that also true in your case?
Yeah, it was true in my case. Yeah. So there are lawyers that transition into finance. There's no doubt about it. I'm a little bit more non-traditional in the sense that I started my own firm, my own hedge fund, my own investment management firm. And that's very rare, to be honest. It's not common at all. So in order to do that, I found some mentors out here in New York. I, again, cold email people. That's another huge lesson. Cold email really, really works. As long as you do it well and you're not spammy, people are generally willing to help. So I really reached out to a bunch of hedge fund managers that I'd read about and had meetings, and they really helped me get this thing off the ground and get to where I am right now.
Now, what about the actual process of publishing the book? Was that difficult, finding a publisher? Tell me a little bit about the process for doing that.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother podcast for sure. I'm a first-time author, so this has been relatively new to me.
Yeah,
So
man.
first of all, it's a self-published book. I'm taking on all the publishing myself. There are a variety of reasons for that. I think one of the main reasons is that it's actually more economical to take it on yourself. Working with a publisher, while you may get an initial royalty check, which is certainly nice to have, they take a huge cut of your royalties, no matter how many books you want to sell. And also, they don't really help with marketing. That's another misconception about pursuing published books. You think that if you work with a Simon and Schuster or Wiley or whatever the publisher is, that they're going to be pounding the pavement for you, talking about your book. That's certainly not the case. So that's another reason why you may not want to go the published route. So as far as self-publishing, I obviously wrote the book myself. I hired an editor to look it over, bounce some ideas off of me, hired a designer for the cover and interior, uploaded everything myself to Kindle and Barnes & Noble, Google Play, all of those places. So it does take time. You could delegate a lot of these tasks away. But since this is my first book and I wanted to make sure it was right, I took on a lot of it.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. So do you see yourself ever going back to practicing law, or what do you think?
You never say never, right? You never know where your career may go or opportunities may arise. I do think that being out of legal practice for about 4 or 5 years now, I'm assuming it's like riding a bike, right? It would take a little time to get back into it, but there would certainly be a lag in terms of me getting back into the swing of things. So if I had to say now, I probably would not, but having that legal training and my legal background certainly obviously would help being a practicing attorney. But no matter what I do, even if I don't do that, it is helping me day to day.
Yeah. Would you say that what you're doing now, you really enjoy much more than being a lawyer? I mean, is that a fair statement, or it's just different?
100%. Yeah, 100%. It's the investment management business is like a puzzle in so many ways. I'm a value investor, so I try to analyze companies and project cash flows of companies out into the future and develop a portfolio around that. And every day is different. As we're recording this, the Russians are invading Ukraine. Inflation's at a 40-year high. Anything can change day to day, and so it's an ever-evolving puzzle. It's like a 4D chessboard that you're always trying to solve. So it's something that I love looking at every day, and something that I don't think I'll ever get sick of.
Now that your book is basically completed, or you've done all the work, what do you think? Was it worth all that effort, or it's it's a lot of work, I'm assuming, putting a book together?
It is a ton of work. Yeah, this is a multi-year project. I think it was 3 years is how long it took from idea to conclusion. And I dropped it at a certain point too. It was more of a side project. It was definitely worth it, I would say. I love reading. It's one of my favorite hobbies. Seeing myself as a published author is a really cool thing. In the future, I don't know if I'll write more books. I think I will, more on the financial and investing side. Yeah. It just takes a lot of time. You have to be patient. You have to put in the reps as well. A good book on this is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, if your readers may be interested in that. He really he talks to writers, mostly fiction writers, but also nonfiction writers. And what he's really saying is that you have to become a professional. You have to treat writing as a profession that you have. And if it's a side project, that could be more difficult because you have your job and your family obligations. But if you really want to get your project done, whether it's a book or a podcast or anything like that, you need to treat it like a job, put in your reps every day, and just get 1% better every day. And then from there, over time, it'll happen.
Is there something you wish you knew before you wrote the book that you learned that if you had known, you would have either done something differently or maybe not done it at all or anything like that?
I'd have to reflect a little bit more on that. I think that it would have been nice to know more about the publishing process for sure. It's a new domain and skill that I've had to learn. But I think through all these things, even if you have the knowledge beforehand, you almost have to go through it and make mistakes as you go along. Like even in my case, leaving law, I knew that it would be challenging, that there are certain challenges leaving the law, like losing your sense of identity. That's something that's really huge. You put in so many hours becoming a lawyer and years becoming a lawyer and going into the office every day as a practicing lawyer. Having that disappear once you leave legal practice is actually a huge challenge. I knew about that before leaving, but you almost have to live through that in order for it to really sink in. So I suppose for a lot of things, it would be nice to know, how things will work out down the road before it actually happens, ex ante. But sometimes you just have to go through it and make mistakes.
Well, Adam, I've never been part of a book, so I'm very excited to be part of this, and I really appreciate your inviting me to be part of it. I look forward to seeing the final product, and if you do decide to write another book, I'd love to invite you back and have you chat with me about it again.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. Richard's chapter is great in the book, so I recommend that to your listeners and readers of your blog, check it out. It's a great chapter.
All right. Thanks so much, Adam. This is Richard Hsu and Adam Pascarella. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard.